Working at McDonald's was supposed to be a temporary gig, a way to save some money while I studied at the local university. But that summer, it became the start of something far darker, a series of encounters that would derail my life, leaving me haunted, scarred, and afraid of even my own reflection. It all began on a suffocatingly hot day, with sunlight streaming through the drive-through window in blinding beams. The line of cars stretched beyond sight, as familiar as the smell of fry grease clinging to my clothes. I'd spent countless shifts handing out burgers and sodas, smiling through exhaust fumes and grumbling customers, the faces blurred together, passing through like a carousel of strangers. But that day, one person stood out, and she would come to haunt me. At first, it was her wig that caught my attention, a bright, garish red, as if someone had slapped ketchup onto her head. I could tell right away it wasn't natural. It clashed horribly with her outfit, a mix of torn denim and neon accessories, a style that screamed trouble. She was in the passenger seat, leaning across her boyfriend to snatch the food from my hands with a harsh glare. There was something off about her, something feral in the way her eyes locked onto mine, a smirk lurking on her face. I tried to keep my eyes down, focusing on the order screen, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She ordered a 10-piece McNugget and a large Coke. Her boyfriend asked for a Big Mac and a Sprite. Routine, I thought. Just another order in a long shift. I double-checked the bag and handed it over, expecting her boyfriend to take it. Instead, she snatched it, her fingers brushing mine as she did, her nails rough and sharp. She narrowed her eyes at me, the smirk turning into a sneer. I gave her a polite smile and wished her a happy day, watching as they sped off. I figured that was the end of it. But it wasn't. Just minutes later, she stormed into the restaurant. Her wig gleamed in the fluorescent lights, her posture rigid with anger. She planted herself at the counter, demanding to speak to the manager, her voice cutting through the quiet murmur of the dining area. Her tone was harsh, accusing, as she claimed we had cheated her. Apparently, she'd counted 9 nuggets instead of 10. I busied myself with making a McFlurry, glancing over only occasionally, trying to avoid her line of sight, but I could hear the venom in her voice, rising in pitch with each word until my manager stepped in. The exchange escalated quickly. I could see the tension mounting as the woman spat out insult after insult, her body leaning forward as if ready to pounce. My manager, already having a rough day, snapped. Her voice rang out. "Who do you think you are, coming in here and treating us like this? You want to act like an animal? I'll drag you out myself." It was like a switch flipped. The woman lunged over the counter, her hand coming down on a stack of cups, sending them clattering to the floor. She grabbed trays, utensils, anything within reach, and hurled them across the counter. A customer standing nearby ducked as a stray straw holder flew past him, spilling straws across the floor like fallen soldiers. "You think I'm stupid?" she screamed. "You can't count to 10? I ought to rip off one of your fingers so you know what it's like." My co-workers tried to step in, some attempting to reason with her, others just holding back as she tore through the restaurant like a tornado. She ripped down a plexiglass shield in front of the register, throwing it with such force that it struck one of my co-workers in the face, leaving a bloody gash near his eye. He stumbled back, clutching his face, blood streaming through his fingers. Then her eyes turned to me. She pointed at me with a twisted grin, her eyes wide and wild. "Bring her out here," she screamed. "The one who handed me that damn bag. Let's see her try to hide from me now." I froze. My blood ran cold as her gaze fixed on me. I felt like a deer in headlights as she pushed past the counter, her hands reaching out as if to grab me. Before she could close the distance, 2 co-workers managed to pull her back, dragging her toward the exit as she kicked and screamed, cursing everyone in her path. The last thing she said before disappearing was a promise. "You can hide behind these walls, but I'll find you. And when I do, you're gonna regret it." The police arrived an hour later, took statements, and watched the footage from the security cameras. They said they'd look into it, but as weeks passed, it became clear that she'd vanished without a trace. I tried to move on, tried to forget, until that day in the drive-thru several months later. It was late in my shift when I saw her again. She was in the same car, that hideous red wig shining in the fading daylight. My stomach clenched as her boyfriend ordered the same Big Mac, and she the same 10-piece McNugget. But this time, she stepped out of the car. She walked up to the drive-through window, her eyes locking onto mine with a malicious glint. She didn't say a word, just took her food and held my gaze, her lips curling into that same eerie smirk. I thought about calling the police, but by the time I worked up the nerve, she'd already driven off. As my shift ended, I felt the dread creeping in. I gripped my pepper spray, a small, faded pink bottle from high school, as I hurried to my car. The lot was empty, the sun dipping below the horizon, casting everything in a hazy orange glow. I was nearly at my car when I heard footsteps, then quickened paces. I turned and saw her, sprinting toward me. Before I knew it, she was within reach. I fumbled with the pepper spray, aiming blindly and spraying it in her direction. Her scream tore through the silence as it hit her face, her eyes reddening, tears streaming down her cheeks. But she didn't stop. She clawed at her eyes, spat on the ground, and with a low growl, charged at me. I barely had time to throw myself into my car, slamming the door shut, when a rock smashed into the window beside me, shattering it. I screamed as she reached through the broken glass, her nails digging into my scalp, yanking me out. The next moments blurred in a frenzy of pain and panic. She dragged me across the pavement, her nails raking across my face, slicing my skin like razors. Her fists came down again and again, leaving bruises, her words searing into my mind as she spat them out. "Remember me every time you look in the mirror. You'll never forget me." I lost track of time. All I remember is the manager's voice, the sensation of her grip loosening as she threw me to the ground. She was gone before the police arrived, once again too late, once again doing little to help. I left McDonald's, too scarred, physically and mentally, to return. I missed my college graduation, too ashamed to show my battered face to anyone. Now, whenever I look in the mirror, her words echo back at me. The scars she left are a permanent reminder, a cruel memento from a stranger whose face I will never forget. I'd only been working at a small Mexican restaurant for a couple of months when things started to unravel in the most unsettling way. My co-worker, Hugo, who was always one of the friendliest and most dependable employees, began acting like a completely different person. He had been with the restaurant chain for years, moving between branches and knew every detail of the place. We'd struck up a friendship pretty quickly. His humor made long shifts bearable, and his dedication was contagious. But one day he changed. Out of nowhere, Hugo became hostile, snapping at customers and muttering things under his breath. The gleam in his eyes, that friendly spark, was replaced by a dark, restless look that gave me chills. I kept telling myself he must be going through something personal, but his demeanor got worse with each shift, like he was fighting some internal battle he couldn't shake off. One particularly slow afternoon, I decided I couldn't watch him struggle like this any longer. While the restaurant was quiet, I pulled him aside near the stockroom and gently asked, "Hugo, are you okay? You don't seem like yourself lately." He turned slowly, fixing me with a glare so sharp it made my skin prickle. "What's that supposed to mean?" he snapped, his voice lower and rougher than I'd ever heard it. I took a step back, trying to stay calm. "I just mean, well, you've been different lately. You don't seem like you." Hugo scoffed, his lip curling with irritation. "I'm not the problem here. Ever thought maybe it's these customers? They're staring at me, whispering. You think I don't see it?" I blinked in confusion. I hadn't noticed anything unusual with the customers lately. If anything, they'd been the same as always. Hugo, I don't know if..." "Stop looking at me like that." He cut me off, his voice suddenly louder, sharper. His outburst caught the attention of the few customers nearby, and my stomach twisted with unease. Hugo, normally the calmest person in the room, looked at me like I'd done him some grievous wrong. "Hey, maybe you should take a little break," I said, trying to keep my voice light. Hugo opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, Sarah, our area manager, strode up, her expression severe. "Hugo, my office. Now," she ordered, her voice unyielding. Hugo hesitated but eventually shuffled off, muttering something under his breath. I stood there, rattled, as Sarah shot me a look. "I'll handle it," she said quietly before disappearing into her office. Moments later I heard muffled shouts, but I didn't dare move closer to listen. After that, Hugo was suspended, and Sarah recommended he seek counseling. I thought they were overreacting, considering he'd always been a solid worker, but his behavior was strange enough to put everyone on edge. I tried to shake off the tension, but something about his wild eyes haunted me. But Hugo wasn't the only one. A few days later, Amy, one of the kitchen staff, started acting off too. Amy had always been straightforward, sometimes blunt, but she was reliable. Recently, though, she'd been jumpy and distracted, muttering to herself as if she were talking to someone invisible. I'd catch her staring off into space, her face a mask of worry. One evening, as orders piled up, I went to the back to see what was causing the delay. I found Amy standing by the counter, gripping a large chef's knife so tightly her knuckles were white. Her shoulders were trembling, and she didn't seem to notice me as I approached. "Amy?" I asked cautiously, my heart beginning to pound. "You okay?" She turned slowly, her eyes wide and frantic, darting around the room as if she was expecting to see someone, or something, lurking in the shadows. "Did you see it?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "See what?" I replied, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. She looked at me, her face pale and sweaty, and whispered, "The thing. The monster. It was here, right here. I saw it." My mind raced, trying to process what she was saying. A monster?" She nodded, her breathing shallow, and for a second I thought she was going to faint. "It was watching me," she murmured. Her eyes were filled with a strange intensity, like she truly believed something was there. Before I could say anything more, Sarah walked in, and Amy's whole body went rigid. She let out a piercing scream and raised the knife, lunging at Sarah with a look of pure terror. Sarah dodged out of the way just in time, and Amy stumbled forward, nearly dropping the knife. "Call 911!" Sarah shouted at me, struggling to restrain Amy, who was still trying to claw her way toward her. My hands shook as I dialed the emergency number, barely able to speak as I explained the situation. The police arrived within minutes, taking Amy into custody as she ranted about monsters and shadows. I gave my statement, trying to explain how out of character this was for her, but the officers looked at me skeptically as if I were hiding something. I felt a weight pressing down on my chest as I watched them lead Amy away, her face twisted in terror. Sarah knew something was off, and the next day she called the health department for an inspection. When the inspector arrived, he found something deeply unsettling in the kitchen. Behind the main freezer, a large black stain spread across the wall, its dark veins stretching out like the fingers of some unnatural creature. The mold looked like it was alive, pulsating faintly as if it had a life of its own. They evacuated the restaurant immediately and brought in a team of specialists who ran tests on the mold and examined the air quality in the kitchen. The results were chilling. The mold was a rare, toxic variety, releasing spores that affected the brain, causing hallucinations, paranoia, and heightened aggression. It was like something out of a nightmare. I felt my stomach twist as I realized what this meant for Hugo and Amy. They'd both been exposed to this fungus for weeks, breathing it in, day after day, until it had begun to warp their minds. I'd spent plenty of time in that kitchen too. What if I was next? The restaurant remained closed for months while a specialized team cleaned out the mold and decontaminated the building. All employees were sent for medical screenings, and thankfully I hadn't shown any symptoms. But Hugo and Amy weren't so lucky. Both were admitted to intensive therapy to deal with the trauma they'd experienced, the fungus having left a lasting mark on their mental health. The company took care of the medical bills, but the damage was done. After the restaurant finally reopened, it was never the same. The memory of Hugo's rage and Amy's crazed stare haunted us all. It felt like that strange, pulsating mold had left something behind. A shadow, a lingering fear that hung over the place. To this day, every time I walk past that restaurant, I can't shake the feeling that I'm being watched, that the mold isn't gone, it's just lying in wait, waiting for someone else to breathe it in. It was only my third week working at an old, fine dining restaurant tucked away in a quiet part of Chicago. The place was the epitome of vintage charm, a relic from a bygone era with its dim lighting, grand chandeliers, and dark woodwork that seemed to hold secrets in its grooves. That night, a deep winter chill had swept over the city, keeping patrons away and leaving the dining room nearly empty. Only a handful of flickering candles cast their wavering light across the tables, shadows dancing against the walls like ghosts in an endless waltz. Being the newest hire, I was stuck with what the staff called the graveyard ritual. While my colleagues headed out early to grab a few drinks, I was left alone to clean up, stack chairs, polish the silverware, and lock up once I was done. I was no stranger to closing up alone. There was a quiet rhythm to it I usually didn't mind, but tonight felt different. The chill had seeped into the restaurant itself, making everything feel heavier, darker. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It had just struck 11, and the night ahead stretched out before me, slow and thick as molasses. To help pass the time, I decided to call Gemma, my girlfriend. Her voice always managed to lift my spirits, and just seeing her face on my phone screen brought a warmth that cut through the eerie silence of the empty restaurant. "Hey, beautiful," I greeted her, a smile spreading across my face as her image filled the screen. "Hi, babe," she replied, her eyes crinkling as she smiled back. "How's it going over there? Quiet as ever?" I chuckled and let out a tired sigh. "Too quiet," I muttered, glancing around the dim room. Not even a car passing by outside. It's like it's just me and the shadows tonight. I turned my phone around to show her the empty tables, their polished surfaces glinting faintly in the candlelight. She squinted at the screen, her face tightening as her smile faded. "Wait, there's something behind you," she said, her voice shifting from lighthearted to tense. I froze, a cold prickling creeping up my spine. "Come on, Gemma," I said, trying to laugh it off. "It's just the coat rack." But she didn't laugh. Her eyes were fixed on something behind me, something just out of view, her face pale and unblinking. My heart skipped and I hesitated before glancing over my shoulder. I expected to see an empty room, yet for a split second I swore I saw a shadow, a tall, dark figure gone as quickly as it had appeared. I laughed nervously, brushing it off. "See, Gemma? Just shadows," I joked, forcing a grin. But the room felt heavier now, the silence pressing in. A strange pressure built in my ears, like I was descending on an airplane, blocking out sound and heightening the steady thrum of my own pulse. Shaken, I slipped my phone into my pocket and walked toward the doors, hoping some fresh air might help. But as I reached for the door handles, a wave of panic crashed over me. They wouldn't budge. The doors were locked, not from the outside, but from within. I rattled them harder, my palms slick with sweat, but it was no use. I was trapped. Suddenly, the air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if the building itself were closing in. The silence was shattered by the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere in the darkness. They echoed against the walls, each step growing closer, louder, until they seemed to be right behind me. I turned sharply, scanning the shadows, but saw nothing, only the eerie stillness of the dimly lit room. Just as my nerves hit a breaking point, a loud crash rang out from the bar area. My heart leapt as I turned to see 2 wine bottles rolling on the floor, their contents spilling out, dark and thick like blood, staining the wood. Then, as if in a nightmare, one by one, the bottles lifted off the shelves and hovered in midair. I watched, paralyzed with horror, as an invisible force flung them across the room. Bottles shattered against walls, glass and liquid spraying everywhere, the sound thunderous in the otherwise dead silence. It was like some malevolent spirit was unleashing its rage, tearing through the room with a fury I could barely comprehend. I ducked behind the counter, my hands trembling as I tried to shield myself from the shards of glass that rained down. The strong, sharp smell of alcohol filled the air, stinging my eyes and nose. In the midst of the chaos, I heard something, a low, guttural growl that seemed to vibrate right against my ear, like someone, or something, was right beside me, breathing heavily in the darkness. My heart pounded, my body frozen with fear. In a panic, I fumbled for my phone, desperate to call for help, but my shaking hands dropped it. It hit the floor with a sickening crack, the screen shattering, the light flickering and then fading to black. My only lifeline was gone. Trapped, alone, and out of options. I glanced around for any way to escape, overlooking the dark, empty street. It was my only shot. Summoning every ounce of courage I had left, I grabbed a heavy chair and swung it at the window. The glass resisted at first, but with a second, desperate swing, it shattered, spilling shards onto the floor. But as I turned to grab my coat and climb out, a cold, solid grip clamped down on my shoulder. I spun around, expecting to see someone, anyone. But there was nothing. Just the sensation of icy fingers slowly withdrawing, leaving a chill that seeped into my bones. That was it. I scrambled through the broken window, ignoring the pain, as shards of glass cut into my hands and arms. I stumbled out onto the street, the cold night air biting at my skin, and didn't stop running until I reached the safety of the nearest streetlight. Only then did I dare to look back. The restaurant loomed in the distance, dark and silent, as if the chaos that had erupted inside was nothing more than a figment of my imagination. The next morning, despite every instinct telling me to stay far away, I returned to the restaurant. I needed answers. I had to explain what happened, even if I knew it sounded insane. As I walked in, the owner, Mr. Arthur, a stoic elderly man who'd run the restaurant for decades, called me into his office. I expected him to be furious about the damage, but his expression was calm, almost resigned. Before I could even open my mouth to explain, he nodded knowingly and said, "I know what happened last night, and I know it wasn't your fault." His words sent a chill through me. Mr. Arthur poured me a coffee, his eyes distant as he began to share the dark history of the building. Built in the 1920s, the restaurant had once been a notorious speakeasy during Prohibition, a haunt for gangsters and mobsters alike, including the infamous Al Capone. One night, a violent clash broke out between rival gangs, ending in a massacre that claimed the lives of at least 25 people, men, women, even a few innocents who'd simply come to enjoy a drink. Since that day, he said, strange things had happened in the restaurant. Staff over the years had reported hearing voices, seeing shadows, and feeling an overwhelming sense of dread, but none had witnessed anything as violent as what I had experienced. Mr. Arthur looked at me, his eyes heavy with a sadness I didn't fully understand. "I've tried to keep it quiet, not to scare people away. But the spirits here, they don't rest." He offered me the choice to continue working if I wanted to, but I knew my answer before he even finished. I shook his hand, thanked him for his honesty, and left the restaurant, feeling an unshakable weight lift from my shoulders. As I walked away, I glanced back one last time at the old building, knowing I'd never set foot in it again. When I was a kid, life wasn't easy. Money was tight, and my mom raised me alone after my father left us when I was just a baby. She worked 2 jobs to keep us going, often pulling late shifts or back-to-back days, which meant she was hardly ever home. Most of the time, I was left to my own devices in our cramped, shadowy apartment. We didn't have much, so I learned to take care of myself pretty young, preparing simple meals and finding ways to keep myself entertained. McDonald's was my go-to for lunch, mostly because it was close, cheap, and familiar. I'd saved just enough change each day for a Happy Meal, and honestly, it felt like the only treat I had. For company, I had my mom's old desktop computer, A bulky thing with a humming CRT monitor that flickered if I looked at it from the wrong angle. This was back in the days before social media was huge. No Facebook, no Instagram, just the internet in its rawest form. I found myself in chat rooms a lot. They felt safe, like an escape where I could talk to people in my town or even kids my age who I'd never meet in person. It was comforting, even though I didn't fully understand the risks back then. One evening I met a boy named Jake in one of these chat rooms. He seemed just like me, about my age, a little lonely, and eager for a friend. We hit it off, talking about school, video games, and everything else that seemed important to kids our age. We even played Counter-Strike online a few times, chatting between rounds and joking around. After a few weeks of chatting nearly every day, Jake asked if I wanted to meet up in person, maybe grab a bite to eat. I was thrilled. I'd never met any of my online friends face-to-face before. He suggested we meet at the McDonald's near my house, the one by the big intersection. It was perfect, close enough for me to walk there on my own. We agreed to meet at 6 p.m. Jake said he'd be wearing a green jacket so I'd recognize him. I was buzzing with excitement all day, counting the hours. Just before I left, I raided my mom's change jar for a handful of coins, enough for a happy meal. I arrived at McDonald's a few minutes early, taking a seat by the window where I could see the entrance. My heart raced as I scanned the room, waiting for Jake to walk in. But as the minutes ticked by, no one my age came in. That's when I noticed him, a man standing just outside the window, staring directly at me. He wore an oversized trench coat that seemed odd for the warm evening. His eyes, sharp and unsettling, were fixed on me with an intensity that made my stomach twist. Slowly, he came inside and walked straight to my table, smiling in a way that made my skin crawl. "You're here for Jake, right?" he asked, his voice low and almost too friendly. "I'm his dad." My mind froze. Jake never mentioned his dad would be there. He'd always spoken like he was coming alone. But something about the man's tone made it hard to question him. "Yeah, Jake asked me to come down here to keep an eye on things. You know, this area can be a bit rough," he continued, laughing in a way that didn't match his expression. "I thought I'd bring you a Happy Meal too." He held up the red and yellow box with a grin, shaking it slightly. "Come on, dig in," he urged, setting it down in front of me. I felt a bit uneasy, but the thought of free food overrode my caution. I reached for the Happy Meal, hesitating as his smile widened. As I fumbled with the box, I noticed it was unusually light. I reached inside, expecting fries or a burger, but instead felt something soft and sticky. My fingers recoiled, but he gently pushed the box toward me, his voice barely a whisper. "Go on, have a taste." Before I could pull my hand out, a voice startled both of us. It was one of the McDonald's employees. She stood there, hands on her hips, her eyes narrowing at the man. "Is everything okay here?" she asked, her voice firm. The man's expression changed instantly. "Oh yeah, just spending some time with my son here," he said, laughing nervously. But he kept his eyes down, his grip on the Happy Meal box tightening. The employee didn't move. Her eyes bore into him with a suspicion that sent a shiver down my spine. She wasn't fooled. "Sir, I think you should leave," she said, voice icy. "Or I'll call the police." I watched as he stammered for a moment, his face flushing red. In a flash, he jumped up, leaving the Happy Meal box behind, and bolted out the door without looking back. I sat there stunned, as the employee turned her attention to me, her face softening. "You all right, honey?" she asked. Her eyes were full of concern as she glanced at the abandoned Happy Meal box. I nodded, but I was shaken. She called my mom, who arrived minutes later, her face pale and tense. The whole walk home, she lectured me about talking to strangers and the dangers of meeting people I didn't know. I barely heard her, my thoughts swirling with confusion and fear. The weeks passed, and I never heard from Jake again. His messages vanished, his chat profile gone without a trace. I started to move on, shoving the memory into the back of my mind. But then, a few months later, I was watching the news with my mom when something stopped me cold. There on the screen was the man from McDonald's, the same man who'd claimed to be Jake's father. My blood ran cold as I listened to the reporter's voice explaining his crimes. He was a predator who posed as children online to lure unsuspecting kids into meeting him in public places. His online personas were a front, and his son Jake was nothing more than a trap. As the details unfolded, a sick realization washed over me. I remembered the strange texture inside the Happy Meal box and the way he'd pushed it toward me, insisting I reach in. That empty box, the hole in the bottom. It all clicked together, a grotesque puzzle I didn't want to solve. He'd been trying to lure me into a nightmare, and if it hadn't been for that employee, I might have been one of his victims. To this day, the memory of that night haunts me. The way he looked at me, his twisted smile, and his too close whispers have stayed with me. Since then, I've been cautious, wary of anyone who tries to get too close too quickly, especially online. It's a lesson I learned too young, and it's one I'll never forget. Before we start, please make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video with your friends and family. Also, can you please tell me where and what time you're watching? Thanks. Honestly, I never wanted things to get this bad. All I wanted was a peaceful break with my friends, but who could have guessed it would take such a dark turn? It was the first day of vacation after my freshman year at Brown, and to be honest, I wished I had just stayed in the dorms. But my mom wouldn't let it go, insisting I come home. Ever since moving to Rhode Island, I'd been avoiding that trip back to Iowa. I wasn't in the mood to deal with my screaming brothers or my mom's constant complaining. And as for my dad, I hadn't spoken to him in over 10 years, so he wasn't exactly on my list of people I wanted to see. Even though my mom had carried all the weight since he left, going home just didn't feel right. I knew it was a bit selfish to ask my best friends, Will and Blair, to come with me. They both lived abroad and had planned to stay at the university, so I wasn't sure if they'd be up for the trip. To my surprise, Blair was excited to meet my family, while Will, being Will, just wanted to know if I had any hot sisters. Typical. The three of us had formed an unbreakable bond by doing reckless things together, cliff jumping, skydiving, so this road trip felt like just another adventure. We set off from Rhode Island to Iowa, making stops at every state sign so Blair could take pictures. We had to stop at a bunch of gas stations along the way, and everything seemed perfect until we reached Pennsylvania. My truck is old, the kind that overheats and refuses to start sometimes, but I've always been able to handle it. That day, a dark sedan pulled up next to us, and the guy inside asked if we had any money for gas. Obviously, we were broke college students drowning in debt, so we told him no. But I noticed the guy gave Blair a strange look before driving off. That didn't sit right with me. Will just laughed, saying it was probably nothing, so we kept moving. A few hours later, as we were about to cross from Ohio into Indiana, Blair suddenly shouted, "I need a bathroom, now." There hadn't been a gas station for miles, and I was so focused on driving that I barely acknowledged him. "I'll pee in a bush then," he said, making Will joke that it would be a great show for passing drivers. A little further ahead, I spotted a weird-looking house and decided to stop. The second I put the truck in park, Blair jumped out and disappeared through the front door before I could say a word. "Isn't that a weird place to take a leak?" Will asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yeah, but he just needs to pee." "Then we're back on the road," I replied. We still had a long way to go. But then, my stomach dropped. The same dark sedan from earlier pulled up. The guy from before stepped out and started walking toward us. Will and I exchanged a look, a weird feeling creeping up my spine. Just as I was about to tell Will to find Blair and get out of there, the man pulled a gun. We froze. Blair must have seen what was happening, because she peeked out from inside the house, then immediately ducked back in. The guy demanded we hand over everything we had and asked where Blair was. But before he could do anything else, Blair suddenly appeared behind him, gripping a hefty piece of wood. She swung hard, cracking him over the head. The guy stumbled, dazed, giving Will the perfect opening to kick him in the face. He went down. Out cold. We grabbed his gun and hurled it as far into the undergrowth as we could. "Get in the car, now!" I shouted. The second everyone was in, I slammed on the gas, speeding off without a second glance. "Dude, look at your arm!" Will suddenly yelled. I glanced down and saw my shirt soaked in blood. "I'm fine," I muttered. "We just need to get away from that lunatic." But my mind was racing. How had he found us? We'd left him behind in another state. None of it made sense. Before I could think too hard about it, the check engine light flicked on, making all of us tense up. "It's fine," I reassured them, though I wasn't so sure. No way he can catch us. Up ahead, a McDonald's appeared, its bright sign like a beacon of hope. But as we got closer, my stomach sank. The place was completely dark. No lights, no cars. I pulled into the lot anyway, figuring I could check the engine. "Stay in the car," I told Will and Blair as I stepped out and popped the hood. Immediately, hot steam blasted out. Not good. I wasn't a mechanic, but I knew enough to tell we were in trouble. I grabbed my phone to call for help. No signal. Great. I went back to the car and asked the others if they had service. Nothing. We were stranded in the middle of nowhere, with a busted truck and a psycho possibly still after us. With no other options, we decided to go inside the McDonald's, hoping to at least find some food and a little peace. But the moment we stepped in, we realized something was very wrong. The place looked abandoned. Tables flipped over, windows covered in grime, chairs ripped to shreds. The air was thick with the smell of decay. "I'm gonna find a first aid kit," Blair muttered, ignoring me when I told him I was fine. He disappeared into the kitchen. I tried to keep calm, but every instinct in me was screaming that something was seriously off. And then we heard it, a blood-curdling scream. From the front of the restaurant, Will came running, his figure illuminated by the headlights of our car. But within seconds, we saw him. The guy from the sedan, now wielding a knife, sprinting after him. Before I could react, he caught up to Will and stabbed him multiple times in the back, sending him crashing to the ground, badly wounded. My blood ran cold. "No!" I screamed as Blair and I instinctively backed away in terror. The guy let out a smug laugh, watching as my friend lay dying on the filthy floor. "Who's next?" he sneered. "Come on, quick," I whispered to Blair, grabbing her arm. We bolted for the kitchen, hiding behind the bar. She was sobbing uncontrollably, and I did my best to calm her down, covering her mouth so she wouldn't make any noise. My pulse was racing, but then a sharp, eerie sound cut through the air, the scrape of a knife against metal. He was close. His footsteps grew louder, steady and deliberate. My heart pounded against my ribs. Then suddenly, something strange happened. A new noise echoed through the kitchen. A struggle, crashing, and violent banging. Then came the man's agonized screams. Someone else was there. Was it Will? Could he still be alive? I leaped from my hiding spot, my eyes darting toward the chaos. To my shock, the knife-wielding psycho was locked in a fierce struggle with another man who was desperately trying to wrench the weapon from his grasp. But I had no idea who he was or where he had come from. All I knew was that I had to help. I lunged at the attacker, and together the stranger and I overpowered him. We pried the knife from his hands and beat him down, making sure he wouldn't get up again. Then, using his own clothes, we bound his hands and feet as tightly as we could. Only then did I finally get a chance to see the man who had saved us. He was a farmer from a nearby village who had wandered into the abandoned McDonald's drunk and decided to sleep there. He'd seen everything unfold, from the moment Will was stabbed to when the man turned his sights on Blair and me. And in that moment, he made the decision to step in. Thank God he did. I don't know what would have happened if he hadn't stopped him. Once we had the guy gagged, I ran to the entrance, my only thought being to help Will. But when I reached him, my stomach twisted. There was nothing I could do. He was gone. In the end, we walked with the farmer to his village, where we called the police and a tow truck. The man who had followed us was arrested. Blair decided to head back to the city, while I drove home to be with my parents. Now, more than ever, I needed them. Will's death still haunts me to this day. No matter how much time passes, I can't shake the guilt of inviting him on that trip, the trip that ultimately cost him his life. It was my first year of high school and winter was coming to an end. That night, the air was cool but not freezing. My lifelong friend, who I'll call Lila, messaged me, asking what I was up to and mentioning she was hungry. I happened to be at my cousin's house, about 8 blocks from where Lila lived and roughly a mile from a McDonald's. Across the street from McDonald's was a Target and a few other fast food places, and about a mile and a half away, there was a Burger King. I can't recall who came up with the bright idea to sneak out at 11:30 p.m. to satisfy our cravings, but there we were. Sneaking out was a first for me, though Lila was well accustomed to it. Surprisingly, it was pretty easy for me. I arrived a little late, and Lila was already at our meeting spot. She was dressed in jeans and a blue sweatshirt, while I, on the other hand, had on pajama shorts and an oversized soccer jersey. Not the best choice for a midnight stroll in a chilly, not-so-safe city. We met on the corner and started walking toward McDonald's, catching up on the boys we liked and laughing about our science teacher. The streets weren't deserted, but there weren't many cars either. My main worry was running into my mom while wandering the neighborhood. To save time, we decided to cut through the Target parking lot. McDonald's and Target were slightly uphill, but since we were coming from the opposite direction, the incline didn't bother us. As we crossed from Target to McDonald's, I noticed a tall guy, probably around 6 feet, wearing a black hoodie and shorts. Lila was about 5 feet 2 inches, and I stood somewhere between 5 feet 3 inches and 5 feet 4 inches. Though he initially caught my attention, I didn't think too much of him because Lila and I were too busy laughing and chatting. But being the geniuses we were, we hadn't thought to check if McDonald's was open. Turns out it was, only for drive-through orders. Another fail in our mission to get food, but we didn't give up. Burger King wasn't that far away, so we decided to head there. As we walked, I led the way and Lila kept looking back, a habit of hers no matter where we went, day or night. She grew up in a dangerous suburb where robberies were common, so she was naturally cautious. At one point, she linked her arm with mine and whispered that the guy we'd seen earlier was following us. That immediately put me on edge. I discreetly glanced back and saw him just a few meters behind us. Lila started walking faster, but I told her to slow down. I didn't want him to notice we were nervous. That might complicate things. Our city wasn't the safest, so I had learned to stay aware of my surroundings from a young age. I wasn't the smartest in my family, but I wasn't clueless either. We kept walking toward Burger King, but the unease grew with every step. Lila kept glancing back and the guy was still there. My stomach churned with the fear that he might try something. What would we do if he did? We didn't have a plan. I prayed silently that nothing would happen. Despite my nerves, I didn't want fear to ruin our little adventure. A part of me found the situation oddly thrilling. Maybe the risk added to the excitement of the night. I suggested crossing the street and heading into Target. Lila nodded, and we did just that. I glanced back as we crossed and saw the guy following us again. By now, our anxiety was through the roof. While Lila was on the verge of panic, for some reason I found myself laughing. The absurdity of sneaking out for the first time only to end up being followed was bizarre. Maybe it was the nerves, but I couldn't help but laugh as we cut through the giant Target parking lot. I decided to FaceTime my cousin to tell her what was happening. Even though I had snuck out, I trusted her not to rat me out. Lila, meanwhile, was panicking. Right as I was explaining the situation, I hung up the call because Lila and I decided to run toward Target's entrance. The guy was still trailing us. Once inside, we walked around to make sure he didn't follow us in. Thankfully, he didn't. We sat by the glass windows to assess the situation. Then Lila said she saw him walk past Target in the direction we had come from. I called my older brother for advice, and he told me to contact my cousin and have her pick us up. Instead of calling, I texted her and asked if she could bring her boyfriend. He was a muscular guy who could intimidate anyone. She replied that he'd meet us at the entrance, and I agreed. Lila looked relieved, but I still felt a mix of concern and curiosity. A few minutes later, a guy walked into Target and approached us. I don't remember exactly what he looked like, but I think he was Caucasian and around 5 feet 7 inches. He told us he had been at the McDonald's drive-thru when he noticed us walking away and saw the guy following us. He explained, the guy told us he had seen us cross over to Target and just wanted to make sure we were okay. We assured him that we were safe and shared our side of the story. He nodded but warned us that being out so late wasn't a good idea, and that we should really call our families to come pick us up. We told him our ride was already on the way and thanked him for his concern. Hearing someone else acknowledge what had happened made the whole situation feel more real. Eventually, my cousin arrived, with her boyfriend and her dad in the car. So in a way, we were arrested, but luckily, I didn't get into any real trouble. Having my cousins there helped a little, plus I knew my mom would have been furious with them for not realizing I had snuck out under their watch. Lila came back to my cousin's house with me, and we spent the rest of the night talking about what had happened. I even FaceTimed one of our older friends to tell her the whole story. Years later, Lila and I stopped talking for reasons unrelated to that night, but we always remembered that experience and laughed about it whenever it came up. Still, looking back, it was terrifying to realize just how easily things could have gone wrong if we had kept walking to Burger King. The fact that someone else had witnessed the whole thing made it feel even more real to me. After that night, I was followed a couple more times, and I quickly learned not to take my safety lightly. So yeah, I think it's safe to say I won't be going out alone at those hours ever again. To share this story, I need to start from the beginning. I had just turned 16, and to celebrate this milestone birthday, I traveled to Toronto with my 2 best friends, Lily and Mia, along with my parents and younger brother. We rented a hotel for the weekend, spent time swimming in the pool, and went shopping. Everything was going perfectly, until it wasn't. That night, after we got back from the mall, we returned to our hotel room, took showers, and started getting bored around 11 p.m. I knocked on the adjoining door between my room and my parents' room to ask if we could go for a walk around Toronto since there wasn't much to do. My mom said yes, and just as we were about to leave, my little brother decided to tag along because he was bored too. In the end, my parents came as well to keep an eye on him. So there we were, walking through the streets of Toronto, soaking in the city's energy. My parents and brother walked a bit ahead while Lily, Mia, and I trailed behind, laughing and chatting. After a while, I started feeling hungry and told my parents we wanted to grab something to eat. It was my birthday, so of course they agreed. They walked with us until we came across this large 2-story building packed with restaurants and fast food spots. In the center of the building, there was a big escalator leading to the 2nd floor. There weren't many people around, but the few that were there seemed odd. We didn't see any restaurants on the 1st floor, so we decided to take the escalator to the 2nd. As soon as we got there, my parents headed straight for a McDonald's and grabbed a table far away. Lily wasn't very hungry, so she looked for a table for us while Mia and I decided to grab some ice cream. While we were waiting, we noticed a group of 3 boys sitting near the ice cream shop. They kept staring at us and whispering to each other. Then 2 of them stood up and got in line right behind us. It felt strange, but I didn't think too much of it at first. Suddenly, one of them, who had a weird vibe, started talking to Mia. This guy was tall, looked Jamaican, and had a strange demeanor. He tapped Mia on the shoulder and asked, "Hey, I've never been here before. What flavor of ice cream do you recommend?" Something about him unsettled me. He was probably in his 30s and had an odd mannerism. He kept fiddling with the lid of a small dark bottle while talking. Mia, being her friendly self, didn't seem fazed and chatted with him. Meanwhile, the other guy in their group approached me. I instantly felt uneasy around him. He was also a tall Jamaican man, wearing a white raincoat and hat. He walked up to me and said, "Wow, you look exotic. What's your ethnicity?" His question caught me off guard. It felt intrusive, so I nervously laughed and answered, "I'm from Lunenburg, but my heritage is a mix of Asian and Latin American from my parents," I said. He grinned and replied, "Wow, that's a really beautiful mix. You're very pretty. Can I have your number?" I immediately told him no, but he kept insisting, saying he just wanted to text me. I stood firm and repeated that I wouldn't give my number to a stranger. His persistence made me increasingly uncomfortable. He was clearly too old for me, and I was only a teenager. Who even asks a stranger for their phone number like that? As he kept trying to convince me, I noticed the third guy in their group, who had been sitting at their table, stand up. This man, another tall Jamaican, was dressed sharply and carrying a briefcase. He made brief eye contact with me before heading down the escalator to the first floor. At this point, I was officially creeped out and ready to leave. Suddenly, the guy talking to Mia turned to me and said, "Oh, I have your friend on Snapchat. Can I get yours too?" I firmly told him I didn't give out my Snapchat to strangers either. He chuckled and then asked, "Okay, but are you two here alone or are your parents nearby?" I froze. His question threw me off, and I couldn't think of a reply. My mind went blank, and I felt paralyzed. Luckily, Mia stepped in and answered for me. "Our parents are at McDonald's and our friend Lily is sitting at a table nearby," she said confidently. The boys glanced over at Lily and waved. Lily, who had been watching us, immediately noticed our discomfort and started preparing to come over to get us out of the situation. Right at that moment, my parents approached Lily and told her they were heading back to the... My parents decided to head back to the hotel room since it was just a few minutes away, and my mom figured we would be fine. Lily nodded, so my parents and brother went to the escalator. Then Lily came over to us and the strange guys. "Hey, is everything okay here?" she asked. The guy in the white raincoat turned to me and said, "Oh, sure. Bye, beautiful." I avoided looking directly at him. Lily, Mia, and I exchanged uneasy glances and silently agreed it was time to leave. I didn't want to stay there a second longer. We started walking toward the escalator, but to my horror, the same boys began following us. Panic set in. My parents were already gone, leaving the three of us, just 16-year-old girls, in a nearly empty building late at night in an unfamiliar city. I leaned over to Mia and whispered that the guys were following us. Her face fell, and she immediately looked worried too. We stepped onto the escalator, and to our dismay, they followed. Only two other people stood between us and those men as we descended. When we finally reached the bottom, I spotted my parents and brother waiting in line at Starbucks. Relief washed over me, and we rushed toward them to explain what was happening. As I started telling my mom, I noticed the men realized they were still within reach. Instead of continuing to follow us, they turned and went back up to the second floor. My mom reassured me, saying they were gone and told us we should head to the hotel. Nervously, we agreed. My parents and brother exited the building first, and we followed close behind. As we stepped outside, I noticed the guy with the briefcase, the one I thought had left earlier, standing by the exit. He stared at us, his eyes cold and unblinking. A chill ran down my spine as we walked past him. I felt his gaze linger on us, but he didn't make a move, likely because my parents were there. Even so, I couldn't shake the fear. I glanced over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't following us, and what I saw made my heart pound. He approached a black car parked nearby, its windows tinted so dark I couldn't see inside. He crouched and tapped on the driver's window. The driver rolled it down just enough for them to talk. The man with the briefcase leaned in, whispered something, and then straightened up and walked back into the building we had just left. At that moment, my fear reached a new height. I knew those men had bad intentions, and I was grateful we had gotten out safely. I didn't want to think about what could have happened if my parents hadn't been nearby. The thought alone was terrifying. I couldn't figure out why the man had approached that car or what they wanted from us, but I didn't want to stick around to find out. We hurried back to our hotel room. As soon as we got there, Mia broke down in tears, fully realizing what had happened. Lily and I tried to comfort her, but I couldn't shake the unease either. That's when I decided to ask Mia something that had been nagging at me. "Did you really give them your number or social media?" I asked. Her response made my stomach drop. "Yes," she admitted quietly. But it was what she said next that chilled me to my core. She confessed she had also given them my Snapchat because they had asked, and she had been too scared to say no. My heart sank further as Mia suddenly realized she had her location sharing turned on. We all panicked. She quickly tried to turn it off, but when she opened the app, we saw something horrifying. One of the guys' Bitmoji appeared right next to hers, meaning he was either inside our hotel or very close to it. Without hesitation, Mia turned off her location and blocked him immediately. That night, none of us could sleep. We didn't dare leave our room, not even to peek into the hallway. Thankfully, nothing else happened, but the fear lingered long after. The next morning, I told my parents I wanted to go home. We still had the day left to enjoy, but I couldn't shake the feeling that those guys might still be around, possibly watching us or even stalking the hotel. I felt unsafe, and I couldn't relax. My parents understood and agreed to leave right away. We packed up quickly and headed home. As we drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about how lucky we were that my parents hadn't left before all of this happened. I don't even want to imagine what could have happened to us if we had been completely alone. When I was 19, I worked at a pizzeria in Texas. The environment there was so chaotic and hostile that I had to go to therapy afterward to process everything. It's important to note that most of the employees, if not all, were undocumented immigrants, which meant we had no real rights. Things began to spiral after the old boss, whom we'll call Tom, was fired. Honestly, Tom was a great guy. He let us take things easy, and while some customers occasionally complained about the wait, most left happy because they appreciated that our dishes were made with care and passion. The real trouble began when management, aiming for more efficiency, decided to hire an outsider instead of promoting one of us. That's how Liz came into the picture and became the root of our nightmare. Liz was obsessed with time, constantly carrying multiple watches and never letting us rest. Management adored her, claiming she had worked wonders in other restaurants, but for us she was pure torment. From her very first day, Liz didn't give us a moment's break. Whenever a customer arrived, we had to drop whatever we were doing and be instantly ready. She didn't care if we were in the middle of preparing food. Everything had to be prepped in advance and done like clockwork. The pressure was suffocating. We'd get chills every time a customer walked in knowing Liz was watching. If anyone dared to relax for even a second, she'd appear out of nowhere, screaming like a storm. At first, we thought she was just trying to impress management and would eventually ease up, but days turned into weeks, and her intensity only escalated. She began timing every task, scrutinizing us constantly and piling on the pressure. While we laughed about her madness after shifts, none of us dared to confront her. She wasn't just our boss. She was genuinely intimidating. Her piercing stare made us feel like any misstep could cost us our jobs. Her rules were ridiculous. Once a week, she'd make us prepare orders under her watch, and for every second we exceeded her set time limits, she'd deduct from our pay. As stress levels climbed, several coworkers chose to quit. But here's where it gets disturbing. Every time someone left, Liz would lose her mind. Even making eye contact with her during those moments was dangerous, as her rage would explode. The next day, she'd return with a sinister energy. And what's worse, those who quit seemed to vanish. Nobody, not even their families, heard from them again. Although we had no solid proof, we began suspecting Liz was somehow involved. Meanwhile, in the kitchen, the pressure kept building. I vividly remember one incident when one of my colleagues managed to finish a task in record time, but instead of praise, it only brought more fury on the rest of us who couldn't meet that mark. Initially, customers were thrilled with the speed of service, but soon complaints started pouring in. In our rush to prepare everything quickly, we often forgot ingredients or made mistakes. When errors occurred, Liz would wait until after the shift to unleash her wrath, her anger simmering patiently. The atmosphere in the pizzeria grew more suffocating each day. One time, A coworker accidentally put bacon instead of salami on a pizza, leading to a customer complaint. What followed was horrifying. Liz stormed in, screaming with a rage we had never seen before, and began throwing trays against the walls in a fit of madness. The tension in the restaurant was unbearable. We often whispered to each other about how insane the job had become, but nobody dared to take a stand. We were all too scared. The thought lingered. How long could this madness continue? We were terrified to find out. It felt like leaving the job wasn't just quitting, it was abandoning life itself. We clung to our positions, praying things would somehow return to normal. Then came the scariest day of all. At the end of the shift, Liz gathered us outside and announced that this would be her final big test. We smiled nervously, hoping this meant we'd never see her again after that night. But none of us could have predicted what she had planned. Out of nowhere, Liz pulled out a revolver. We froze, our palms sweating as we raised our hands. "I can't leave behind any incompetent workers," she said coldly. "My shift ends at 9 p.m. You have 15 minutes to get all the orders out. Anyone who takes more than 2 minutes, boom, you're fired." Her voice was chilling as she pointed the gun at us one by one. At first, we all managed to make pizzas within the absurd time frame, working at an inhuman pace. But then, one of my colleagues took just a second too long. He didn't even have a chance to apologize. Liz pulled the trigger without hesitation. The deafening gunshot echoed through the restaurant, and blood splattered everywhere. We stood there, paralyzed, our minds reeling. In that moment, we realized the terrifying truth. Liz's madness wasn't just an act. She was serious. We had thought her threats were metaphorical, a twisted way to intimidate us into working harder. But no, she truly meant to kill anyone who failed. Rather than cleaning up the gruesome scene, Liz ordered us to keep working as if nothing had happened. My coworker's lifeless body lay slumped nearby, blood seeping onto the floor, staining the seasonings and utensils. Yet none of that mattered. What mattered to Liz was that we kept making pizzas no matter what. Any mistake could make one of us her next target. Looking back, I wonder why we didn't rebel in that moment. But we were just a group of terrified teenagers, desperate to survive and make it home alive. From that moment, we worked like our lives depended on it, because they did. Liz inspected us with a cold, calculating glare, stopwatch in hand. I'll never forget Marta, an Ecuadorian coworker who broke down crying, her sobs shaking her entire body. She couldn't compose herself in time, and when she missed the mark, Liz didn't hesitate. Another gunshot rang out. I was standing next to Marta when it happened. Her blood splattered on my clothes and face, and I nearly fainted. When it was my turn, Liz loomed over me, the stopwatch ticking. My legs were trembling, my hands shaking so badly I could barely work. My fear slowed me down, and as I fumbled, Liz's rage intensified. She stormed toward me, eyes blazing, and she grabbed me by the hair and slammed my head against the blood-streaked counter. "Is this why you can't move? Get used to it, because if you mess up, your head will end up here too. Do you understand me?" She snarled. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I managed to respond, "Yes, ma'am." With trembling hands, I began making the double cheese pepperoni pizza she had demanded. My mind was in chaos. I couldn't focus. All I wanted was to cry and run home. But Liz's gun remained pressed against my temple, her unblinking stare radiating merciless fury. Somehow I finished the pizza and she stopped the timer. Smiling as if the entire ordeal had been a twisted form of entertainment, she said, 1 minute and 58 seconds. Good job. Then, glancing at the clock, she added, "It's 9 p.m. It's been a pleasure working with you all. I know I'm leaving behind an excellent team." What happened next left us frozen in disbelief. Without warning, Liz raised the gun to her own head and pulled the trigger. She dropped instantly. None of us could process what we had just witnessed. The room was silent except for the lingering echoes of the gunshot. We were paralyzed, overwhelmed with fear and shock. After that night, I never returned to the restaurant. I didn't even go to collect my paycheck. The worst part? The truth never came out. The only report in the news was that the supervisor of a popular restaurant had taken her life at home during a depressive episode. There was no mention of the horror we endured, no mention of my colleagues or the terrifying events that unfolded. In the end, we didn't matter. We were nobodies, voiceless and invisible. Those deaths, the bloodshed, the nightmare, it was as if none of it had ever happened. Today, I live in this country legally and have a decent job, but the scars from that experience have never fully healed. For years, I suffered from relentless panic attacks, and it took countless therapy sessions to begin piecing myself back together. Even now, the terror of that night haunts me. The bloodied bodies of my co-workers, the metallic stench of blood, it's etched into my memory. No matter how much time passes, I know I'll never forget the horror of that night. It was the early 1990s, and I was just 9 years old. My parents decided to take me to a new fast food restaurant that had recently opened on the outskirts of town and had become incredibly popular. It was a Saturday night, and we were celebrating my dad's new job. To be honest, I wasn't too interested in his job. I was far more excited about the combo meal he had promised me, a combo that came with a toy supposedly better than McDonald's. When we got there, the place was bustling with families and kids running around. My mom found us a table in the corner while my dad went to place our order at the counter. While waiting for the food, I kept staring at the display of toys that came with the combos, disappointed to see they didn't have the one I wanted. I asked my dad to try and get it anyway, but he came back with bad news. They were out of stock. He told me to be grateful and make do with what was available. Normally, I would have shrugged it off, but something my friend's brother had told me came to mind. He worked at a McDonald's and said sometimes extra toys were stored in the back, but employees just didn't bother to get them. I naively thought this restaurant might do the same. As we waited, I started glancing around, looking for a way into the storeroom. That's when I noticed something odd, a small door hidden behind a metal panel on the wall near our table. It looked like some kind of maintenance access, and no one else seemed to be paying attention to it. My curiosity got the better of me. When I touched the panel, I realized it wasn't fully shut, as if someone had forgotten to close it properly. Gently, I pushed it open, and to my surprise, it swung inward with a soft click. What I saw on the other side was nothing like I expected. The little door opened into a cold, dark corridor. I hesitated, knowing I shouldn't go in, but I couldn't resist. I wanted to see where they kept the toys. As I stepped in silently, the first thing that hit me was the air. It smelled like raw meat mixed with something chemical. At the end of the corridor, there was a large stainless steel door without a handle. I pushed it, and to my surprise, it opened effortlessly. On the other side was a huge industrial kitchen that was completely different from the one visible from the counter. The room was filled with shelves, tables, and an array of sharp knives. In the center stood a massive freezer with its door slightly ajar. Out of morbid curiosity, I leaned in to take a look, and immediately regretted it. Inside were two whole-skinned horses, their lifeless bodies frozen and frosty. Their vacant eyes stared into nothingness. One of the horses was missing an entire leg, and the sight made my heart pound in terror. Before I could process what I was seeing, I heard footsteps. A large man entered through a side door holding a huge cleaver. He walked straight to the freezer, inspecting the contents. Then, without hesitation, he hacked off the horse's remaining leg as if it were an ordinary piece of meat. I was frozen with fear, my chest tightening as I struggled to breathe. Without meaning to, I let out a small, involuntary gasp. The sound echoed through the room, and the man's head snapped toward me. Our eyes met, and his face twisted into a furious expression. He was a huge man wearing a blood-stained apron, and he grabbed my arm so hard that I cried out in pain. "What are you doing here, boy?" he barked. I stammered, trying to come up with an excuse, but no words came out. He set the cleaver on a nearby table and lunged at me with unbridled anger. "You shouldn't have seen this," he snarled, grabbing me and slamming me onto the cold metal table. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move as he loomed over me. Just then, another man rushed into the room. His eyes widened when he saw me. "What's this?" he asked sharply. The first man replied, explaining that I had snuck in. Picking up the cleaver, he turned to me and muttered darkly, "What if we cook him instead of the horse?" My blood ran cold. I tried to squirm free, but his grip was unrelenting. "He's just a kid, Ted," the second man said nervously. "He doesn't know anything." "That doesn't matter. He's a nosy little brat and I want to eat him," Ted growled, bringing the blade closer to my face. I was sure I was about to be killed, butchered like those horses and turned into a burger. "You're overreacting, Ted," the second man said, trying to calm him down. Then he looked at me and added coldly, "Listen, kid, if you tell anyone what you saw here, we'll come to your house and make mincemeat out of you and your family. But if you keep quiet, everything will be fine. Got it?" Tears welled up in my eyes and I nodded frantically. I knew I was in a terrible situation. My mind went blank, my chest tightened, and I felt like I couldn't breathe. I wanted to scream, but deep down I knew that would only make things worse. Then Ted let out a mocking laugh and shoved me to the ground. "Get out of here and remember what we said," he growled, gesturing toward the door with his sword still in hand. I didn't waste a second. I bolted as fast as I could, my legs trembling so much that I nearly tripped. When I finally made it back to our table, I couldn't hold it in anymore. I blurted out everything I had seen to my parents, but instead of believing me, my dad frowned, and my mom rolled her eyes. "Stop fooling around, Ralph. Today is an important day for your father," she said dismissively. "It's not funny, kid. If this is about the toy, I'll get you another one," my dad added, shaking his head. I tried to insist, but as I spoke, an employee cleaning nearby started laughing. "You've got quite the imagination, kid. Maybe you should write a book," the man chuckled. I glanced at his face and froze. There was something dark and threatening in his eyes. He knew I was telling the truth, and his cold, menacing look warned me to keep quiet. I couldn't believe it. My whole body was shaking, tears streaming down my face, but my parents completely ignored me. Instead, my mom scolded me for making a scene, and my dad told me to calm down. As they ate, I glanced toward the counter and saw that same employee staring at me. His face was cold and expressionless. Slowly, he put a finger to his lips, signaling for me to keep quiet. My heart pounded, and I couldn't sit still. I needed to prove to my parents that I wasn't lying. Without thinking, I jumped up and ran toward the door leading to the kitchen. "Ralph, stop!" my mom shouted, but I didn't care. I had to show them what I'd seen. When I got to the door, it was closed. I banged on it with all my might, but no one answered. Finally, an older man opened it from the inside, smiling kindly. "What's wrong, kid? Are you lost?" he asked curiously. The kitchen behind him looked spotless, clean and organized like any regular restaurant. That's when it hit me. They had planned for this. They expected me to try something. My parents arrived behind me, apologizing to the man. I frantically tried to explain, but everything I had seen before was gone. The cooks were nowhere to be found. The freezer had disappeared, and the kitchen looked perfectly normal. It was as if nothing had happened. As we walked out of the restaurant, my parents scolded me the entire way. In the car, my mom told me I was grounded, and my dad threatened to take away my bike. They didn't care that I was still crying. They thought it was all a wild story. They don't understand, I thought to myself, staring out of the car window. That's when I saw them, Ted and his partner, standing outside the restaurant. They were leaning casually against the wall, staring right at us. Ted smiled at me, raising his hand in a slow, deliberate wave. My stomach churned and I sank into my seat, trembling. It was only later that I realized they didn't actually want to hurt me. They just wanted to scare me into silence. And if I ever told anyone, the story would sound so ridiculous that no one would believe me anyway. That's exactly what happened. To this day, my parents insist it was all a product of my childhood imagination. I eventually stopped trying to convince them, but the experience left its mark on me. From that day forward, I could never eat hamburgers again. I hated them. That burger joint stayed open for a few more years, finally shutting down in 1995. To this day, I'm certain none of the diners ever realized they were eating horse meat. And now, there's no way to prove it. It was an evening like any other, and my dad decided it was time to celebrate. My brother had just completed another school year, and I had earned a spot at university, giving us the perfect excuse to go out for dinner. Honestly, a burger place wouldn't have been my first choice, but as the older sister, I figured I had to act like an adult and let my preferences slide. Joshua, my younger brother, was over the moon, convinced that hamburgers could solve every problem in life. My mom, however, was more engrossed in her phone than the evening itself. We arrived at the restaurant around 8 o'clock. The air conditioning hit us as we stepped inside, a refreshing relief from the stifling heat outside. As I looked around, I noticed the place was almost empty, just a couple of families scattered about, and a group of friends laughing in a corner. On the bright side, it meant plenty of space to choose from, so we grabbed a table by the window. Dad and I headed up to order, and everything seemed perfectly normal, until I saw him. There, behind the counter, stood my ex, Samuel, in the restaurant's uniform and wearing a ridiculous hat that barely tamed his messy hair. His expression was friendly, almost goofy, like someone incapable of doing harm. But I knew better. I knew the truth about who he really was. The reason I had broken up with him was that he turned out to be a terrible person, someone dangerous not just to me but to others. At first I thought he was harmless, just another misunderstood guy with a troubled vibe. But over time, I uncovered the real Samuel, a manipulative, toxic person with a simmering rage that was barely contained. He wasn't physically imposing, but his dark personality made him a true threat. I avoided eye contact, but he spotted me immediately and called out in a disturbingly casual tone, "Hi, Sophia. You look great." His voice sent chills down my spine like nothing had ever happened between us. It was hard to believe this was the same man who had once trapped me in his house and threatened my life the day I ended things with him. He had stalked me on social media and pushed me to my limits. That morning, when I finally escaped through the window, I swore I'd never see him again. Yet here he was, acting like everything was perfectly normal. I wanted to scream, to ask him how he dared to speak to me like that. But I knew his game. If I lashed out, I'd end up looking like the villain, and he'd play the victim. So I ignored him and quickly finished placing the order. When I got back to the table with our tray, my heart raced faster than I wanted to admit. He hadn't said anything overtly threatening, but just seeing him again rattled me deeply. As we began eating, Samuel passed by our table several times, always smiling a little too wide, but only I seemed to notice. My mom was glued to her phone, oblivious, and Dad was too absorbed in his burger. Meanwhile, Samuel's eyes lingered on me with a strange intensity, as if waiting for a reaction. I felt trapped. I had only taken a few bites of my burger when something felt off. There was a crunch, a sound that shouldn't have been there. Alarmed, I opened the bun to check, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Nestled between the cheese and the meat were crushed cockroach parts. Their legs stuck to the sauce, and a dark liquid dripped from the remains. "What the hell?" I whispered in horror, my throat tightening. Jumping from my seat, I dropped the burger onto the tray, disgusted and shaking. I wanted to vomit, but the shock froze me in place. My dad noticed the mess on my tray, and suddenly his expression shifted. My dad's expression quickly shifted from surprise to a rare anger I'd only seen a handful of times. "What the hell is this?" he bellowed, grabbing the burger and storming toward the counter. My mom and Joshua exchanged puzzled glances, not understanding what had just happened. I watched as my dad held up the burger like it was evidence in a criminal case. The employees behind the counter seemed stunned, unsure of how to react. And then Samuel appeared from the kitchen, his demeanor calculated, as if he'd been rehearsing this moment for hours. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how this could have happened," he said smoothly, "Let me get the manager." But I knew he wasn't going to get anyone. As he slipped back into the kitchen, a chill coursed through me. Once I could muster the courage to speak, I shouted, "When the manager comes, I'm going to make a scene. I won't let this slide." "Are you okay, Sophia?" Dad asked, his tone heavy with concern. "No," I replied firmly. "This was intentional. That's Samuel, my ex." As if on cue, Samuel reappeared, but he wasn't with the manager. Instead, he held the burger in his hand, his smile now devoid of its fake charm. Something sinister gleamed in his eyes, making me feel sick to my core. I could sense his intentions had taken a dark turn. Without any warning, Samuel vaulted over the counter with alarming speed and was suddenly in front of me. My body froze as he reached out, gripping my arm with an unnatural force. Before I could process what was happening, he ambushed me with the burger, shoving it violently against my face. The stench hit me immediately, a nauseating mix of rotting meat, spoiled eggs, and some unidentifiable chemical. As the burger smeared across my lips, I felt the legs of the crushed cockroaches brush against my mouth. Panic surged through me as I tried to pull away, but his grip was ironclad. With his free hand, he seized my jaw, prying it open, and began forcing the vile contents into my mouth. Bits of the burger crumbled, and the sauce oozed down my cheeks as an unrecognizable liquid seeped into my throat. I felt something land on my tongue, a metallic tang that made me gag instantly. I wanted to spit it out, but Samuel's relentless grip prevented me. His twisted laughter echoed in my ears as he continued to force me to swallow. Along with the cockroach fragments, I could taste decaying meat and a sticky, putrid substance that clung to my tongue. My body thrashed, trying to free itself, but he was far too strong. My attempts to scream were drowned out by the choking sensation as more of the burger found its way into my mouth. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, but in reality, it all happened within seconds. My dad finally snapped out of his shock and lunged at Samuel, grabbing him by the shirt and shoving him backward. Samuel hit the floor hard, yet he still clung to the disgusting burger. Samuel sprang to his feet quickly, his eyes wild and darting between me and my dad. By now, chaos had erupted in the restaurant. Customers were screaming and employees were scrambling to intervene. That's when I noticed something my dad didn't see. "He's got a knife!" I screamed, my voice breaking with terror. My dad barely had time to react before Samuel charged at him, the knife aimed to stab. The moment unfolded in slow motion, my heart pounding so violently I thought it might stop altogether. The blade inched closer to my dad's chest and I felt utterly helpless. But just as the knife was about to strike, a burly employee appeared out of nowhere, delivering a brutal punch to Samuel's face. The force sent Samuel flying several feet before he crumpled to the ground, unconscious, still clutching the mangled burger in his hand. The police arrived shortly afterward, handcuffing Samuel as he sobbed and begged them not to take him away. "I don't know what came over me," he pleaded, but I didn't believe a single word. Since that day, I can't think about burgers without tasting that horrid, vile concoction. It's as if the cockroach legs are still brushing against my lips, the stench of decay haunting me. My appetite is gone, replaced by nausea at the mere thought of that night. As for Samuel, he now has a restraining order. Looking back, I don't know why I didn't file one the moment I escaped his house. But honestly, I'm not even sure how much protection it offers. All I can do is stay as far away from that psychopath as possible, and pray that if I ever see him again, he won't recognize me.